The Italian Mafia is probably the most famous crime syndicate in the world. Its money is generated from corruption, intimidation, drug dealing, and protection. But where did it all start? Where did the Mafia start? It is famous across the United States, particularly in the cities of New York and Chicago. But it did not start there. It started on an island called Sicily. The American-Italian Mafia is well known and has been popularized in films like The Godfather, but its origins in Sicily have never really been explored. The Mafia started in Sicily some 150 years ago. In 1972, an Italian journalist by the name of Luigi Barzini wrote this about the sect that was the Mafia in Sicily. The reason why Sicily is ungovernable is that the inhabitants have long ago learned to distrust and neutralize all written laws and to govern themselves in their own rough, homemade fashion. This arrangement is highly unsatisfactory because it cures no ills, promotes injustice and tyranny, and leaves crimes unpunished. It also does not make use of the best qualities of Sicilians, and has kept the country stagnant and backwards in almost every way. What he is essentially saying is that although there were official institutions like the police in Sicily, they were in effect completely unuseful because nobody trusted them because they were so corrupt. The corruption in turn led people to not report crimes and certainly not risk their own lives by being witnesses in crimes. The reason this was the case was because of the corruption, but also because there were more powerful institutions within Sicily, and those more powerful institutions were mafia families. It was, in effect, pointless to report a crime because the police, who were, to be fair, very underfunded, would rarely investigate a crime. And even if they knew who had done it, nothing would happen without the say-so of one of the powerful criminal families. In effect, these families could commit any crime against you, and even if you reported it to the police, under their orders, would turn the other way, and in fact, would probably report you for reporting the crime, which could lead to dire consequences. When a country has no functioning laws, other people will not invest in such a country because they know that their investment would be completely unsecure. At any moment, everything that they built could be taken away from them by the powers that be in an island like Sicily. Without investments, there is virtually no industry, and therefore a complete lack of jobs. With a complete lack of jobs, The labour market has little value, and as such, the peasants in Sicily got paid very, very little, because those who were the employers knew that everybody on the island was desperate for some kind of job. And no business leader pays more for work than they have to. It is simply not good business. Going back to the beginning of time, Sicily was always an island that struggled to find its own identity. It had been ruled by so many other countries that it struggled to become a country in its own right. At various points throughout history, the island of Sicily has been governed by the Greeks, the Carthaginians, the Romans, the Vikings, the Normans, the Germans, and even the Spaniards. It is, in essence, a country that never had a chance to form into the stability of a recognized sovereign state. And it was this disruption that held Sicily back in terms of creating solid institutions that were able to govern the island effectively. Every time Sicily began to form the beginning of a country and began to develop its institutions, another invading country would come along and smash those institutions to pieces. With its institutions and laws constantly being tempered with, it had no ability to form the solidity of a proper governable law. But it was the Bourbon kings, who were ancestrally French, who ruled Sicily at the beginning of the 19th century. The Bourbon kings maintained a feudal system in Sicily. This system meant that very few of the island's inhabitants actually owned land, which meant that the peasants were simply laborers and had no stake in any of the island's economic development. It was a truly elitist system. By the year 1812, things began to change in Sicily. The feudal system began to collapse because the law had put an end to ancestral inheritance, meaning that the automatic inheritance of a massive estate in Sicily did not go automatically to the firstborn son. As a result of this change of law, which meant that their eldest son did not automatically inherit their estate, these feudal barons began selling off their estates in order to liquidize their assets. This meant the local peasantry were able to buy small plots of land and in effect become their own bosses. With the selling of patches of land to the peasantry, the island's economy began to change. Over the next decade, the island of Sicily began to change. And within 10 years, nearly 1/4 of the island's land was owned by peasants. This process continued throughout the 19th century, and then was accelerated when an Italian general called Giuseppe Garibaldi marched into Sicily and began a war of liberation against the Bourbon kings. With Garibaldi's successful invasion and so-called liberation, Sicily was made part of the country of Italy, which made sense since Italy was the closest country to the island itself. The Italian authorities wanted to modernize Sicily, so therefore took all the land from the nobility and from the church and distributed it throughout the peasantry of the island. So although from the years of 1812 to 1860 there had been a change in the island that had led to there almost being 2,000 independent farmers on the island, after the Italian authorities took over, within a decade there was around 20,000 independent farmers on the island. This was a great thing for the Sicilian people, because for the first time they were able to own their own business and take their own future into their own hands and give them something to work towards, rather than just working for the crumbs that were dished out to them from the powerful barons who had owned all of the land before. However, one bad point about all of this independence was the fact that crime was rife on the island, and theft went through the roof. During the feudal system, in which nearly all the land was owned by feudal barons and by the church, they were able to protect their land and the crops that grew on them, because they had the resources of economy of scale. However, with the farms being much smaller and therefore being owned by much poorer peasants, they did not have such facilities. They could not employ their own army of guards to protect their crops, and for this reason, theft across the island went through the roof. Although the takeover by Italy was a good thing for the majority of Sicilians, who now found themselves with their own plot of land and had their own future in their own hands, many in Sicily opposed the Italian rule and barked at the laws which were imposed on them, and therefore decided to take up arms against the Italians. And as a result, a civil war began, which lasted from 1860 to 1872. The problem with this war is that it was very damaging to the Sicilian economy, and as such, many peasants starved. With the starvation of so many peasants, even more of them decided to take up theft as a way to feed themselves and their family. So what started as a good idea, Italian rule giving the Sicilian people the right to farm their own land, in actual fact led to the destruction of the country as a functioning state, as the Civil War corrupted all of the authorities and led so many to poverty. But not only the increase in theft caused problems, but the war itself meant the police force could not keep the law and order of the land, and certainly could not investigate and watch over and protect small holdings of farms. Without the economy of scale that the feudal barons and the Catholic Church had before, farmers were powerless to protect their land, and so began to hire tough men who had weapons to protect their land. They were, in effect, paying protection money, because without it, all of their crops could be stolen or sabotaged. This was a solution for many farmers to the theft that had almost ruined their farms. However, these strongmen, these gangs of thugs, soon realized that with there being no effective law on the island, that they could not only work for the farmers, but they could force the farmers to give them tributes. So what started with an innocent hiring of tough men to protect the farm turned into a situation where these tough men would force the farmers to pay them for protection. In effect, these farmers were paying these thugs to protect them from themselves. Many farmers would resist this, and as a result, the criminal gangs would start to vandalize their crops, or even worse, hand out terrible beatings, which may even lead to death. It became a situation where the farmers simply had to pay the gangs for protection, because if they didn't, they or their family could be killed. In fact, some farmers would end up having to pay many gangs for protection, because having been forced to hire one gang for protection, other gangs would move in and force them to pay. In forming the original gang that was supposed to be protecting them, sometimes these gangs would go after the other gang and tell them that this was their client, this was their land, and that they were not allowed to step in. However, in some cases, these gangs would just allow other gangs to come in and threaten the farmers, and allow them to be exploited by multiple entities of thugs. In effect, they were offering them no protection at all. The only thing they were getting protected from was themselves and the dire consequences that they would bestow upon farmers who did not pay them personally. With many of these gangs being larger than others, the larger gangs would seek to take over the farms that were being protected by the smaller gangs. Sometimes this would lead to murder, and other times it would form into an alliance. An alliance was always more optimal, because with an alliance you were not simply wiping out a competitor and taking over the protection money of the farms on which they feed. You were making yourself stronger as a gang. And as a result of this, these small gangs formed into larger gangs and began to take over larger and larger areas. With this economy of scale and the vast amounts of money that were pouring in, these gangs were able to bribe and even intimidate the police. Local police officers from a station which maybe only had 1 or 2 staff would suddenly find themselves surrounded by 40 or 50 armed men who would simply inform them that if they did not do as they were told, that they would be gunned down. The police officers, in effect, knowing that there is no functioning government on the island, would have nowhere to turn, and so would fall under the control of these massive and very well-armed criminal gangs. The main area of strength for these large and powerful criminal gangs was the rural areas around the city of Palermo. But soon they managed to infiltrate the city itself as they sought to take over the institutions that ruled the city. As a result, many bodies were found on the streets of Palermo. Some were left there because the villains did not have time to take the bodies away, and some were left on the streets as a message to anybody who defied the rule of these criminal gangs. The citizens of Palermo lived in fear, and this fear enabled the gangs to do anything that they liked, because anybody who stepped out of line and did not follow orders could be found dead in the streets of the city. The only place that the citizens of Palermo had to turn to was the police. But by now it was well known that the police were under the payment of these criminal gangs. You could report an incident to the police, and the police officer could file the report, tell you that he would look into it, and instead go straight to the head of the criminal gang and inform him that somebody has been telling tales about his criminal gang. To report a matter to the police was almost like committing suicide. Perhaps not just for you, but for your entire family. These criminal gangs began to spread across the island. In 1864, a man called Niccolo Teresi Colonna wrote a publication called Public Safety in Sicily. He wrote that because a year earlier, 5 gunmen tried to kill him as he was leaving the city of Palermo. Niccolo Teresi Colonna was an Italian patriot and also a strong unionist. He had spoken out on various occasions against these sects of criminal gangs, and that had brought him to the attention of these villains, who decided that he had to die. So therefore they tried to kill him as he left the city of Palermo in 1863. Fortunately, his guards managed to scare these villains away, and so Niccolo Teresi Colonna survived, and in 1864 he wrote his publication entitled Public Safety in Sicily. Niccolo Teresi Colonna does not mention the mafia as such. Instead, he refers to a sect of thieves. And in his book, he talks about how they have control of the country, and that any citizen approaching a policeman would be executed. He talks about the instigation of the law of humility. This sect of thieves was particularly powerful in the lemon growth industry. Lemons were a high-value crop that was introduced to Sicily by the Arabs in the 1700s. By 1856, lemons had become the most valuable crop in Sicily, with over 2.5 million crates of them being sent to New York alone. This cash-rich crop was ripe for exploitation by this sect of criminal thieves. The mafia wanted in because they would try and get into any business where there was money to be made. However, one of the problems with growing lemons is that they are a very temperamental crop. Small changes in sunlight, or weather, or soil acidity can lead to the death of an entire crop, which makes them very, very susceptible to sabotage. This crop was perfect for the Mafia because it was not only high value, but also because of its volatility. It could be easily threatened, and the owners of lemon farms would have no choice but to pay the Mafia not to destroy their crops. In effect, the Mafia could put a lemon farmer out of business. Every year, a lemon farmer would invest in his own crop in terms of seed and labor, knowing that he would get a return when he sent the lemons for sale. If one year there was nothing to sell, then the next year he would have no money to pay for fresh seeds and to pay for the labor necessary to produce a crop of lemons. The Mafia, in effect, would decide who would stay in business and who would go bankrupt. A lemon farmer had simply no choice. They had to pay. In 1874, a man called Dr. Gaspari Galati inherited a 4-hectare lemon grove from his brother-in-law, who had died of a heart attack because of threats from a criminal gang. When Dr. Galati arrived at the plantation, he noticed that the warden was behaving very strangely. So he began to watch him and see what he was up to. Unknown at the time, the plantation was right in the heart of Mafia territory, as it was very close to the city of Palermo. He had no idea when he came to the plantation that it was in effect under the control of the Mafia. The warden, a man by the name of Carolo, was actually part of the Mafia. He worked there so that he could steal coal and lemons from the trees. The Mafia were in effect taxing the farm. Dr. Galati's brother-in-law must have realized what the warden was doing and confronted him, and as a result, he received a string of death threats which led to his demise. Imagine the shock of believing that you own a farm, only to find out it is in fact under the control of the Mafia, a force which you are powerless to resist, as the police force in Sicily was completely unfunctional and in fact working for the Mafia itself. Realizing that Carolo, the warden, was in fact stealing from the farm, Dr. Galati fired him. However, speaking to some of his friends in Sicily, when they found out that he had fired the warden, they instantly told him that he should hire the warden back. Refusing to give in to this, Dr. Galati stood by his decision and did not hire the warden back to the farm. Some would say that this was very naive of Dr. Galati. However, because he was not from the area, he did not realize the extent of the Mafia's power, and he did not realize the extent to which they would enforce their law. Dr. Galati rightfully felt that because he owned the farm in every legal sense, that it was entirely up to him who worked at the plantation. In most countries in the world, this would be the case, as the government would enforce such a legal position. However, in Sicily, There was no law as such, only the law of the Mafia. Dr. Galati hired a new warden so that the farm would function as it should. However, within a few months, the new warden had been gunned down. Following the death of the new warden, Dr. Galati went to the police and reported his death and claimed that a criminal gang had murdered his new warden. This was a pointless exercise because the local police had already been paid off by the Mafia. So instead of following up the death and investigating it, instead they went straight to the local Mafia boss and told him that Dr. Galati had accused them of murder. As a result of this, Dr. Galati and his family received a string of death threats via letter, insisting to him that he had to hire Carollo back as the warden of the estate, knowing that he simply could never make a profit out of the farm. Dr. Galati left with his family and never returned. The reason it was impossible for him to ever make a profit was because the Mafia was stealing any profitable margin that the farm would make. He was, in effect, running the farm for them so that they could reap all of the benefit from it. Dr. Galati wrote an account of his experience in Palermo, and it is for this reason that we are aware of what happened to him. Such stories are prevalent throughout Sicily. Many farmers, or the vast majority of farmers, became subject to Mafia control. The particular gang that caused all of the problems were from a town of only 800 inhabitants. And in the year 1874, 23 of them were actually killed by this criminal gang as they sought to take over the entire area and killed everybody who defied them. It was in the 1870s that Mafia control truly spread across the island and started to infiltrate every type of business that there was. It was also in the 1870s that many of the rituals which we now know as being part of the Mafia, even in the United States, began to come into existence. The initiation process, in which a Mafia member has his finger pricked and the blood drips onto the picture of a saint, which is then set on fire and is held in the hands of the newly inducted Mafia member, became popular in the 1870s in Sicily. It was also around this time that the law of omerta, or silence, came into being. The word omerta originally meant to be humble, and what is meant by that is to be humble, is to be silent. It is this silence that allowed the Mafia to grow and become more powerful, because nobody knew that it really existed. It is the fact that the Mafia stayed in the shadows, slowly getting more and more powerful, that allowed it to grow. With all these rituals, and with the increase in power, it becomes obvious that the Mafia was no longer just a loose connection of rival gangs, but it had in fact some unity across the entire island. And it was in fact within this unity that it gained its strength and power. Over the 1880s, the Mafia continued to grow and infiltrated almost every part of Sicilian culture. In fact, in 1881, Niccolo Teresi Colonna, the very man who tried to expose the Mafia, became the mayor of Palermo. It became obvious that Niccolo Teresi Colonna had also been paid off, as he hired a member of the Mafia to be his chief of police. Niccolo Teresi Colonna must have realized over the passing years that if he was to ever have any political ambition, that he must work alongside the Mafia, as they had already had control of many courts and could also alter the ballot box. In effect, the only way a person could gain any power on the island of Sicily was to be a puppet of the Mafia itself. Niccolo Teresi Colonna must have been ideal for the Mafia. The fact that he had stood against them, the fact that he had vowed to get rid of them, made him the perfect candidate as mayor. Because who would believe that such an organization existed if the man who was brought into power was apparently, publicly, completely against them? In 1922, Mussolini became the Prime Minister of Italy. Mussolini realized that he would never have full control over the island of Sicily, as the Mafia undermined all local institutions and also rigged elections. Mussolini therefore launched a brutal crackdown on the Mafia, which resulted in over 1,000 Mafia members being convicted and put into prison. As a result of this, the Mafia retreated to the rural areas of Sicily, where they kept themselves relatively quiet until Mussolini's demise. After Mussolini's death, the Mafia rose to prominence and began taking over Sicily once more. The Mafia continued to grow and grow in Sicily and infiltrate itself into more and more organizations, whilst remaining in the shadows. It was not until the Maxi trials from 1986 to 1992 that Sicily got a grip on the Mafia. During these trials, 475 Mafia were jailed. However, this was not easy. In order to successfully try and convict these criminals and actually get them into jail, special courthouses had to be built, with cages inside of the actual courtroom, and with hundreds of armed guards outside and inside, just in case other members of the Mafia tried to break their friends free. These trials ended the 150-year reign of the Mafia in Sicily, and gave Sicily the chance to do something it had never been able to do before: form a real country with solid institutions and laws that would be fulfilled by the actual government forces. The Mafia's time in Sicily is just about almost done. However, its legacy is undeniable. It is incredible that a gang of hired thugs could form an organization that literally ran the entire island. But this is a lesson to be learned. when there is political upheaval, and when there are people who are willing to take bribes or be threatened into doing things that they do not want to do, then such gangs can rise and extend themselves from being simple gangs into forming almost a government in their own rights. Could this happen again in any part of Europe? It is highly unlikely because of the technology that the authorities have these days. But still, it is a valid lesson to never turn your back on the truth and allow corruption to take over.